Washington has shifted so far to the right that the Republicans have become an unbearable party. The quote I often use is Charles Barkley saying, "I used to be a Republican until they went nuts." And that's exactly how I feel. But here's the interesting part. It turns out now that's exactly how pretty much the most respected conservative jurist in the country feels. I know because I used to go to the Federalist Society meetings. I'm in a lot of ways still conservative judicially, right? And Richard Posner was a rock star. And the only reason he didn't make it on the Supreme Court is because he's a little bit older and he had all this experience under his belt, but that counts against him because they want the Supreme Court justice to last for decades on end. Now, he has flipped, and he's basically saying the same exact thing as Charles Barkley and I have been saying. Let me give you some of the quotes. And he's referring specifically on the vicious attack against Justice John Roberts after his healthcare decision. So he says, look, because if you put yourself in his position, what's he supposed to think? That he finds his allies to be a bunch of crackpots? Does that help the conservative movement? I mean, what would you do if you were Roberts? All of a sudden you find out that the people you thought were your friends have turned against you? They despise you, they mistreat you, they leak to the press? What do? Do you become more conservative? Or do you say, what am I doing with this crowd of lunatics, right? Maybe you have to re-examine your position. Now, if he just left it there, you might think, hey, you know what, he's just talking about the Supreme Court justices flipping and mistreating Roberts and possibly pushing him to a more moderate stance. But no, he's also referring to himself because he goes on to say, quote, I've become less conservative since the Republican Party started becoming goofy. Now, guys, I think this is pretty telling. I mean, a lot of people might not know who Posner is, but real serious conservative intellectuals know who he is. And for one of the smartest conservatives in the country to say, I've just had about enough with this Republican Party, I think that's a big moment.
Yeah, it's, what he said there with, I've become less conservative since the Republican Party started becoming goofy. You can stay conservative. It's the Republican Party that's leaving the conservatives behind. So it's,
Totally, yeah.
And so, again, he said this off the cuff, but it is telling, and it's sort of what you wait for. You wait for the quote-unquote reasonable Republicans, the reasonable conservatives. I have a hard time with that oxymoron these days, but you wait for them to come out and say something is wrong here. You wait for that Republican U.S. Senator. You wait for Dick Lugar to switch parties. You wait for something like that to happen so that people follow a lead. People are going to follow this guy's lead. He is respected. He's under the radar, but he is, as you said, Cenk, really well respected.
But Michael, I'm not sure that's the case. I'll tell you why. Okay, as far as following his lead, because all the guys who are not in politics day to day, they've already done it. Senator Danforth, the guys who are retired, Alan Simpson in a lot of ways, still troublesome in more ways too.
Course.
But overall saying, hey, these Republicans are out of control, Senator Chuck Hagel from Nebraska from the old days, et cetera, et cetera. And you're right that, look, this is not the conservative position. One of the reasons I left the Republican Party was I am conservative when it comes to the budget. I want to balance the budget. Now, some of that means you raise taxes. Some of that means that, you lower spending. These guys don't want to balance the budget. They just want lower taxes and only for the rich, right?
Right, and they want it in a blanket way all the time. I mean, there are reasons to balance the budget at a proper time. Cutting spending is not always the right thing to do, as you now
Right, of course. It
Yeah.
depends on the circumstances. Yeah. And it was not the conservative thing to do to attack countries that didn't attack you. That's not a conservative way of doing foreign policy. And you go down the list. They're not real conservatives. And so I think Posner's right. And what do you think, Brian? Is there any chance that there's a faction of quote-unquote real conservatives who remember what it means to be a conservative that spin off and go, this Republican Party, all the politicians actually are working for multinational corporations. They're not conservatives, they're just corporatists.
If they did, that would be far too reasonable for cable news networks to cover them.
That's a problem.
Yeah. I mean, I think he uses the word goofy. Maybe that's a euphemism or a way of saying stupid or unreasonable or people who can't argue in a room. Inarguable sort of.
Yeah.
They're offering things that aren't inarguable. They basically are inarguable. Is that the right way to say this? Yes. In that what's being drowned, the drumbeat of mainstream conservatism today is this outrageous, inarguable, unreasonable stuff that's being thrown at all of us, essentially. And here's a guy who basically deals in reason, he deals in logical arguments, and he's finding it difficult to reason or argue with these guys on his side. And I think that basically is a way of saying what has co-opted the party basically is a kind of stupidity.
Yeah, you know, that's one last thing on this. I think Brian really hit it there, because I think this is a marker for that we can say this is the point when smart conservatives thought this party no longer stands for anything. It stands for the bottom line or whoever their donors is. But as far as principles and ideology, we've lost track of what the hell we were supposed to stand for.